Our speaker today, Maurine Beasley, is Professor Emerita of Journalism at the University of Maryland. And as I was reading her bio, I noticed a connection with the state of Missouri. She attended the University of Missouri's journalism school, which, if you know anything about journalism, that is one of the top two, I would say at least, schools of journalism in the United States. She also worked as the education editor for the Kansas City, Missouri Star. I'm originally from Missouri, so I mentioned that to her, and she said, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, "Well, my family, I'm from Rolla, but my family originated in Sedalia." And it turns out that's her hometown, too. So I'm very pleased to introduce a fellow Missourian. Her bio is very impressive. I wish I had time to read the entire bio. But in addition to being the education editor at the Kansas City Star, she also was a staff writer for the Washington Post. She's taught journalism. She's a journalism historian. Her particular focus is upon Washington women journalists, including Eleanor Roosevelt, who considered herself a journalist, and coverage of the First Ladies. Her most recent book is what she will be discussing with us today, Eleanor Roosevelt, Transformative First Lady. Maurine.
Thank you so much, Don. It was really wonderful to find out that we have a Sedalia, Missouri connection. His grandfather was mayor of the town that I grew up in, and I have a feeling that his father actually was a student of my mother at Smith Cotton High School in Sedalia. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that as I get into my speech on Eleanor Roosevelt. But I do want to thank Dr. Kennan, Vice President for Scholarship and Education of the United States Capitol Historical Society, for asking me to be here today and to say I'm so happy I am a member of this organization and have been for many years. We're so fortunate to have a vital historical organization like the United States Capitol Historical Society help us recognize the importance of our heritage as Americans. Isn't it study of the past that gives us the strength and vision to press onward into the future? Every time I get into the Eleanor Roosevelt material, and I must say that I and my husband, Hank Beasley, who has joined me in researching Eleanor for many years, have been into Roosevelt literature for a long, long time. But every time that we get into it, we're struck by how much the life of this woman can speak to us today. I hope I'll be able to share a bit of that with you today. I also want to introduce another person who we will hear more from later, and that's Cornelia Jane Strausser, who, would you wave? She knew Eleanor Roosevelt personally. She visited in the White House as a small child, and her mother, Ruby Black, whose picture you will see as I show my slides, was Eleanor Roosevelt's first biographer and a person who had an impact on Eleanor Roosevelt's career in the White House. I'm so pleased that Cornelia is with us, and she has brought a couple of prize items from her personal collection, which are back there on the table. And she'll tell you about those, but they relate to the visit of the King and Queen of England to the Roosevelts in 1939. She'll share her experiences during the question and answer period that will follow my remarks. I wonder if there are others in the audience who also have personal recollections of Eleanor Roosevelt. Okay, great. Well, during the question and answer period, I hope you'll share those too. Eleanor is still being written about, you know. She lived from 1884 to 1962, but here we have at least 3 books that I know of, and perhaps there are more, on her that have come out within the last 5 or 6 months. I mean, people are still writing about her. They're still exploring facets of her career that have been unexplored. She is still speaking to us. Of course, today what I'm going to talk about is the way she spoke to us as First Lady. So let me put on my Eleanor Roosevelt outfit. Notice the neck piece. Now, that was favored by her and many other ladies of the day. Any of you remember when these were ubiquitous wardrobe items? Yeah, middle class, upper class families, everybody had one of these. Well, I wear this because I like to transport us for a minute or two back to Eleanor's era. And of course, here I have my prop. Here's Eleanor, you see, in, I would say, one of her many traveling outfits. She's carrying her big purse. And here is Franklin with his jaunty look. You would never know that he could not walk when he was in the White House, or actually he never could walk again after he got infantile paralysis in 1921. I saw this in the supermarket. This is an Eleanor Roosevelt refrigerator magnet. You see, she's got her fur on. And then, of course, there was Fallow, their little dog. So, you know, there's an era dominated by these folks here. Please join me now in picturing a scene that will take us back to the past. This is a drafty old house, and I usually just say a small town in Missouri, but this time I'm going to say in Sedalia, Missouri. Here we have an exhausted housewife trying to keep warm at the end of a dull day of housekeeping while reading her favorite columnist in the Kansas City Star. Suddenly she looks up at her little girl and she says, "I am sure that she is better than he is." Well, who do you think the she was? Eleanor Roosevelt. And who is the he? Franklin. My family was rock-ribbed Republican. Believe me, they would have fit pretty well with the Tea Party crowd we have now. But my mother loved reading Eleanor Roosevelt's My Day column. Do any of you remember My Day? Well, I see a few heads nod, yeah. Why did my mother like it? Well, this was a column about a woman who was doing something. She was going places. She was doing things. She was making history in Washington, D.C. And actually, I think my mother's interest in that stimulated me in part to get an education and eventually move to Washington myself. Years later, when I was asked by Lou Gould, who's editor of the Modern First Lady series that has been featured this month during these noontime meetings, I was asked to write a biography concentrating on how Eleanor Roosevelt had changed the role of the First Lady. First ladies before Eleanor had been hostesses. They'd been helpmates to their husbands in various degrees, and some of them had been unofficial advisors. But Eleanor changed all that. She made the role of First Lady a much more important one. And I'm going to be talking about that. Eleanor, historians will tell us, did not want to be First Lady, although she certainly campaigned for Franklin in the election of 1932, the first of the 4 elections in which he was chosen president. Why didn't she want to be First Lady? Most of us would think that was pretty nice, I think. Well, because you have to remember that Eleanor was a Roosevelt before she became a Roosevelt. She was Eleanor Roosevelt Roosevelt. Her uncle was Teddy Roosevelt, who was president of the United States, of course, at the turn of the century. And some say Franklin just followed Teddy's career. And she had seen Teddy's wife preside in the White House, mainly as a hostess, and she just didn't want to do that. She said, "I just don't want to sit in the White House and pour tea." Now, she would have perhaps liked to have been a closer advisor to her husband than she was, although she